The internet being adopted en masse by the world has allowed for many positive developments, such as allowing the flow of information to be open to pretty much everyone with a connection. Unfortunately, it wouldn't take long for people to discover there is something known as too much information, and I think that's the story of Daniel Larson. A story of too much information about the tragedy, disgust, criminal behavior, and trolling, lots and lots of trolling of Daniel Larson. If you don't know who Daniel is, strap in, because the only thing I can compare him to is Chris Chan, and if you don't know who that is, well, you've been blessed with not knowing. First off, I'm just going to say this is a really shortened version of Daniel Larson's story. This is not super in-depth like other videos. I'm trying to get as much lore as possible into 20 or so minutes, so if you're someone who's already well aware of Daniel and are looking for like a really in-depth video, this is not for you. This video is for people who don't want to watch a 2.5 hour video or like a 50 or 45 minute video and are just trying to get the lore and, you know, not have to watch a movie. So I just thought I'd say that because I've gotten comments on the World of T-Shirts video about me missing details. That's kind of the point. I'm not trying to cover everything. On November 15th, 1998, Daniel Larson was born. Nobody would have known the strange and often vile path his life would take. At that moment, he was just a newborn babe. His life while living with his parents was one of neglect and mistreatment, and eventually he would be placed in a healthcare facility known as Tennyson Center, which is designed for the specific purpose of caring for abused children. It would be here that Daniel would meet Bob Proctor, and they would hit it off immediately. So much so that Bob would hang out with Daniel and his grandmother outside of the Tennyson program, and would even later pay for supplies and music production for Daniel. His grandmother would soon get wind of the situation and move from California to Colorado to take care of Daniel. He would move out of the center, and for several years would live with her. We have few videos of this era. All we really have is an audition for a play that Daniel did and an interview with a news station, which is less about Daniel and more about Tennyson Center, though he and his grandma do make an appearance.
Particularly those suffering from abuse and neglect.
Good boy.
When I first came here, I actually was really nervous.
That's 14-year-old Danny, who came from an extremely neglectful home. When his grandmother got word of Danny's situation, she moved here from California to be his guardian.
Compared to the rest of Daniel's life, this was a period of great stability. Unfortunately, in 2019, his grandmother passed away and that stability disappeared. Then, not long after the passing of his grandmother, he would also make a TikTok account, and that choice would have a lasting impact. Daniel's first couple of TikTok accounts did not have a huge impact, but it would not take long for people to begin to notice his odd looks and even odder personality. He would often talk about being a singer-songwriter, and this would lead people to ironically hyping him up in the comments. This would then devolve into Daniel announcing that he would run for president, which is why the nickname Mr. President is often used in relation to Daniel to this day.
I am planning on running for president in the future. If you think that that's a good idea, please click the thumbs up, give me a like, give me a follow, and give me a comment. Please stay tuned. Thank you.
This would be when many people would notice how easy it was to fool Daniel. His delusions of being a famous singer and thinking he was just a famous person in general led him to be easily tricked. He has been trolled at this point thousands of times. People have pretended to be his manager, his father, his security, his record label, his housing, his fans, Grace Vanderwall, and dozens of others. He has fallen for every trick in the book. And bringing up tricks and Grace Vanderwall, we should probably address the elephant in the room. Daniel is obsessed with Grace Vanderwall. This apparently started due to his obsession with not only being famous, but dating a famous celebrity, and he just happened to see Grace on America's Got Talent. Now, while Grace is an adult now, she was not an adult at the start of Daniel's obsession with her, making the whole thing even creepier. Daniel has been catfished by people pretending to be Grace probably hundreds of times at this point, and he's thought that he was dating her before multiple times. While Grace herself has never commented on Daniel, despite her comments being filled with Larson references, her mother Tina has directly messaged Daniel and told him to leave their family alone, even threatening legal action, though this has never come to fruition, and to this day Daniel is obsessed with Grace. The next few months for Daniel after starting his TikTok would include even more views and followers. He would host a Zoom meeting, and then the Daniel Larson subreddit would be created, and then he would release a rap song called Fake News.
All these fake record labels trying to reach out to me. One thing they don't know is they call me Big D. I'll be hanging out here with Roach Records.
But most famous of all was his fog saga. Daniel would somehow break his phone lens to a point that it had become almost unusable. Every day, the camera grew foggier and blurrier. And at the same time, the fog meme was spreading over TikTok, which led to the two being combined into some sort of synthesis of memes.
Sometimes we fight, and we fight, and we fight. And we fail, and then we fight, and then we fail, and then we fight. We have to learn from our mistakes. And that's the only way we can succeed.
This would be the last arc to not be tainted by the allegations, although they're not really allegations, it's just facts. In November of 2020, a startling and highly disturbing revelation would be made by Flexburger, a famous troll in the Daniel Larson community who would pose as his manager, as Daniel was and still is incredibly easy to fool into thinking he has a record label, a manager, and security. Flexburger was able to get into Daniel's Pinterest account, and in it was damning evidence that Daniel Larson is a pedophile. This is not an offhanded accusation based on limited evidence. Daniel has a significant history of alarming statements regarding children.
I am sorry, Dave, for looking up kids wetting the bed.
His Pinterest account had several photo albums filled with young girls, and at first Daniel denied these claims and accused Flexburger of framing him, but he would later admit to owning it.
Yes, the Pinterest was mine. And yes, I actually followed all of those pictures and stuff of, like, children.
This incident ended 2020 on a dark note. No longer was Daniel the delusional guy who thought he was going to be a famous actor, musician, and the president, but instead a highly disturbed individual. 2021 started with Daniel incriminating himself by reading a script in which he sympathized with EDP 445, another person who should not only not be around children, but should also be in jail.
I just wanted to shout out the YouTuber EDP 445. I am sorry for the allegations against you. I am sorry. We are in this together. I have been there too.
Later in May, two incidents would occur, both of which involve the same scenario. Daniel would go live on the 6th on TikTok while being completely naked, and he was promptly banned, and then the next day he made another account in which he did the same thing. You might be asking yourself why, but nobody can tell you that. Daniel's mind is unreadable like Fry from Futurama.
Brains! Fear not, mighty one. Your missing brainwave makes you invisible to them, so long as you avoid intense thinking.
Sorry, what? I wasn't paying attention.
That is most wise.
Who?
The May 6th incident would later become a legendary event in the Larson lore and is still celebrated to this day. These two events would get a lot of eyes on him, and his attempts to return to TikTok after this would be met with quick bans, causing him to move to Like, which is basically just TikTok. Thankfully, he would be able to return to TikTok, but not before having a meltdown about Grace Vanderwall.
I can't take this. I can't take this.
Josh, Dave, Vanderwall family, please, I hope you're seeing this right now, please.
June would see the release of his hit single, Roaring Thunder. Now, compared to his other music, this one isn't too bad, and later he would actually perform it live to an audience of about 2 people. Shortly after Roaring Thunder, we would get our first major Daniel Larson traveling arc. After being tricked into thinking his father wanted to meet him in California, he would board a train in August and head out to LA. Upon arriving, he not only realized that he had been tricked, but his disability care services dropped him, leaving him homeless in Los Angeles. Thankfully this time, he had a case manager that cared enough to convince them to take him back, but he would not be so lucky next time. Upon returning home, Daniel would fall for countless more Grace Vanderwall catfishes and then claim that he hated police while twerking. truly fascinating stuff going on here.
Hate the police, and the police are pigs.
Somehow, someone would later convince him that he and Grace were dating. This wouldn't last long though, as only a month or two later, he would have a meltdown and then say they broke up.
I'm about ready to break up with her. End of story. At this point, I don't care. You are a fool! Grace, you are a liar. You are a liar and you should go to hell.
With that, we can close out 2021. You may ask yourself why I'm sort of speeding by here. We've discussed 2 years of Daniel's internet activity in less than 6 or so minutes. But this is an intentional choice, because I believe that 2022 and 2023 are the wildest parts of the story so far, and I wanted to discuss them in a little bit more detail than the previous years. So let me show you why. Up until this point, Daniel had been living with a caretaker named Jonas and a roommate named Gavin. Now, he did not get along with either. There were constant arguments, and it was just general chaos most of the time.
Nothing, dude. I'm doing nothing.
So what do you do?
Like, just leave me the fuck alone. I want peace and quiet. That's why I'm moving out in a week.
You break my door?
No! Stop!
Daniel would often claim that Jonas was abusive and would hit him, but there's really no evidence of this. Most of the videos we have are of Daniel being the aggressor. This is not an uncommon thing for Daniel. He loves to lie and shift blame and accuse others of hurting him, when in reality, he's often the one doing these things to himself. So, Daniel would also claim while living here that the mac and cheese was being poisoned. No, I'm not kidding, and this would actually be one of the reasons that he would flee and start the homeless arc. Or I guess the second homeless arc. The main reasons for him running out of the house basically was one, because one of his so-called managers was able to convince him that Grace Vanderwall was in Colorado Springs, and also because he just didn't like living there, so he took his chance. This would begin Daniel's homelessness issue. He's been homeless since March of 2022 with some breaks, but none that are that long. Now, in a shocking turn of events, Grace Vanderwall was not in Colorado Springs, as Daniel would discover. Somehow, he was able to make his way back to Denver, and then he would complete a marathon while not only homeless, but with his phone in hand the entire time. It took him 6 hours to finish, and he placed 165th out of 166th. In June of 2022, while Daniel was roaming around Denver, a large event would take place nationwide, which was the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which protected the right to an abortion. Now, I doubt Daniel even knows what an abortion is, let alone Roe v. Wade, but that didn't stop him from attending a protest, and during the said protest, someone made the baffling error of giving him a microphone.
But basically the reason on why I went nude on social media, and I'm going to try to make this as short as possible, is I was told by this fake management that I was to go nude. It was like an audition for a porn, like a regular adult porn shoot that was going to help my career blow up. They said it would give me tons of views and it would help me out.
Daniel would briefly not be homeless after Ox, another one of his managers/trolls, would set up a Twitch account for Daniel, and he would get enough donations from streaming to briefly get a hotel room. Though he was kicked out of the hotel room after too many phone calls from people. But after that, he got an Airbnb for 3 days, and finally got to sleep in a real bed since March. But the Twitch saga would end after Daniel was banned, most likely for saying slurs, but we aren't really for sure. Around the same time, the toothbrush incident would occur. I cannot say more, as this is something not allowed on YouTube. What I can say is that he didn't put the toothbrush in his mouth. After being homeless again, Daniel would be diagnosed with trench foot, a condition that develops from having your feet wet constantly, which causes foot damage. Daniel would also engage in dine and dashing. This will be a rather frequent occurrence as time goes on. And he also trespassed during this time as well, causing him to be charged with petty theft in May, along with destruction of property and criminal mischief. While I can't confirm the others, his destruction of property charge was dismissed, and I would imagine that most of his other ones were dismissed too. In August, Daniel would once again receive housing, and for a brief moment, he would no longer be homeless. Unfortunately, things did not go well. Within days, the address to his house was leaked, and pizza was sent there multiple times a day. Oh, and also I don't know if I'm allowed to say that word on YouTube or not, but it's a phallic object, if I did censor it. Daniel was not an innocent bystander in this, as he would destroy most of his own bedroom and put several holes in the walls. On August 16th, he would have a massive meltdown, which became so bad that the police had to intervene, and he was fined $1,000 for damages, and kicked out of the house. He was there for 46 days. And just like before, he was rude and aggressive to his caretaker, who, just like Jonas, assuredly did not deserve any of this abuse. After being homeless for a few days, Daniel was driven to Colorado Springs by some friends. They went to Dave & Buster's and possibly smoked Daniel. Once again, I'm not sure if I can say that word on YouTube, but if I do censor it, it's a green leaf that you grind up and smoke. They all stayed in a hotel room for that night, and then the next day they went hiking at Garden of the Gods, which began to agitate Daniel. And eventually he began to ask to be taken back to Denver, so they dumped him at a Walgreens in Colorado Springs, which was over 70 miles away from Denver. So Daniel planned to walk the whole way back, but he made it about 20 miles before some fans picked him up and drove him back to Denver. Back in Denver, things went about as well as they usually did. He slept in an elevator shaft one night, and another night he tried to sleep in an IHOP, but he was kicked out. Later in December, Daniel would gamble all his money at a casino and had to be picked up by Bob Proctor, which in the same month he had a meltdown in Bob's car, and Bob had to call the police, further damaging their already fragile relationship.
Get out of my car!
No, you don't! I need
Get out of my car! This is your last chance to get out of my car. This is your last chance. Then I'm gonna call the police.
After this severe meltdown, Bob bought a ticket for Daniel to California. It's not known 100% why he did this, but most think it's because in California they have a law known as a 5150 law. This law basically says that if someone is having a mental health crisis in which they become a danger to themselves or others, they can be involuntarily hospitalized at a psych ward for up to 72 hours. Evidently this plan failed, as while Daniel did indeed go to California, he was never hospitalized, at least as far as I can tell. While in LA, he hosted a fan meetup and weirdly lied that he was in Austin, Texas, though he was very clearly in LA. He also visited some strip clubs and Scientology centers for some reason.
Yeah, you a student? What are you up to?
I'm actually a singer-songwriter.
Oh, okay, great.
Daniel would spend the rest of 2022 here and into the new year of 2023. In January, some fans helped pay for a Disneyland trip, and he seemed to enjoy it. The next day, though, he announced he had scabies. This was because he arrived in LA with no luggage, so he ended up wearing the same outfit for 125 days. Daniel's hygiene in general is quite poor, and I wouldn't even attribute this to the fact that he's homeless, as he refuses to shower even when it's offered, and he also doesn't brush his teeth, and he wears the same clothes, and he also has trench foot, leading to a concoction of various different diseases and smells. People do seem to believe that the reason he refuses to shower in pretty much every situation is due to the fact that it's giving him some sort of sensory issues and makes showers uncomfortable. Or it's just because he's kind of gross. I don't know. Depends on your point of view, I guess. The day after announcing his scabies diagnosis, he was arrested after dine and dashing at a cheesecake factory. He was given a $950 fine. But it was all good because in February, he began another travel saga when he took the bus to Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, he made some new friends, but just like the Colorado Springs incident, they abandoned him. Since Daniel had nowhere to sleep that night, he decided to try a casino. He was in the bathroom when the security guards found him and an episode began. He screamed and yelled, and he was eventually dragged out after a couple minutes. Following this incident, Daniel would go missing, and for days, nobody would know why. There were some sightings, such as a fan claiming he saw Daniel kicked off a bus for refusing to pay the fare, but we wouldn't know what happened until the 23rd, 8 days later. Daniel claims that his absence occurred due to an attack on him by 2 fans. He says that they offered to buy him food in a hotel room, but while they were walking, they hit him from behind and pushed him to the ground and then stole his phone. This appears to be true, or at the very least he was attacked by someone, as people had seen him in an ambulance in the days before. This resulted in a fractured skull for Daniel, which would take months to heal. He claims he knew who did it and would press charges, but nothing has ever come of this. Daniel also informed everyone that he was to receive $380 in food stamps and housing with a company called Sober Homes. This never panned out, as Daniel did not have enough to pay rent and was promptly kicked out of the service. This started the February 27th situation in which Daniel dined and dashed and had his phone number leaked. This somehow all devolved into Daniel wondering where the nearest fireworks store was because he, quote, had an idea, and then later says, "Okay folks, get ready for the biggest incident in all of Daniel Larson history." He said he planned to go into a casino with a firework and then see how the real firing works. These statements would get him banned from TikTok Live, and he would later be arrested for trespassing at the casino. It seems he never put his firework plan into action, whatever the plan was. Daniel would then disappear for a second time. This time it was 12 days. He claimed this was due to being put in a mental hospital, and that the doctors had smartly refused to let him post, considering he would have just immediately doxed himself, as he's done so many times before. After this, Daniel would get tired of Las Vegas and board a train and head to Phoenix, Arizona. This began the Arizona arc. While in Phoenix, he admitted to no longer taking his medication and then promptly got trolled some more. Oh, and he also said Michael Quinn had organized a cybersecurity attack. After lingering around in Phoenix for a few days, he got enough money to pay for a ticket to Tucson. Like Phoenix, Daniel would not stay long in Tucson. While there, he ate dinner with some fans and took some photos. What happened next is sort of unclear. It looks as if he had planned to take the bus to El Paso, but then somehow ended up in Benson, Arizona. But then he was able to just somehow get to El Paso? It's sort of unclear. I mean, he did end up in Texas, but not much happened in El Paso. He would just end up heading to Big Spring. Big Spring, unlike El Paso, was a lot more eventful. Upon arriving, he claimed to have lost his debit card, though he quickly found it, but then claimed it no longer worked. Despite this, he went and ate somewhere, so either he dined and dashed, or he got it to work. Then later that day, there was an incident in which Daniel was arguing with someone named Ivan, who told him he was delusional. Okay, Larson heads are probably going to be disappointed in me, but I never realized that Ivan and Ox were the same person. This probably should have been obvious in retrospect, but I just never connected the dots. So Ivan and Ox are, the same person, and he's this guy who set up Twitch streaming for Daniel. He's been a manager, in quotes, manager, and he's a very controversial figure in the Daniel Larson community. He kind of reminds me of Chris Chan and Null, how despite Null being this pretty controversial figure online, he was someone who, up until a certain nasty, disgusting incident, was helping Chris with financial stuff and figuring out plane tickets, I think, for certain conventions and all this, trying to shield Chris from trolls, but also doing some minor trolling on his own. So I think that's the best analogy, is Ox is to Daniel as Null was to Chris. So I'm gonna wrap this up because I've just been talking for a minute. Back to the video. And then this regressed into someone telling him Ivan had Grace Vanderwall at gunpoint. This saga lasted about an hour, and in that time he would post 47 videos. Oh, and he also thought he was being followed by a white pickup.
He will tell anyone that talks to him about his fame and trolls, which definitely gives off the strong impression of being schizophrenic, despite this being mostly true. The most paranoid he's ever been was during the World Tour arc, when he was convinced that a white pickup truck was following him everywhere. While he was on a live stream, he hid in a Walmart until he was kicked out. Upon being kicked, by pure coincidence, a white pickup truck was in the lot and he freaked out and fled into a nearby gas station. Again, in a total hilarious string of events, another white pickup truck showed up outside. Here's a brief clip of him at the gas station when this truck showed up. You can tell he's convinced whoever is in the car is going to hurt him, but all of the store attendants only see him as a lunatic.
White car is... White car is actually back. Okay. Yeah, the white.
Yeah, this was a whole saga. Following all of this, Daniel would head to Sweetwater and then on to San Antonio, where he slept at the Greyhound station, though he was kicked out after fans began calling the station. That same day, he arrived in Houston. While he was there, he got kicked out of another bus station and a Dave & Buster's. This Texas and Arizona saga would end after a new manager would buy a plane ticket for Daniel to head out to New York City. This was both because of more Grace Vanderwall trolling, as someone had tricked Daniel into thinking she was in New York and needed his help with an investigation. There was also the World of T-Shirts thing. I'm gonna plug my World of T-Shirts video here, link in the description if you're interested. That whole drama was because for the past year and a half, there was mild internet beef between the two, which was really people just tricking Daniel into thinking World of T-Shirts had insulted him or something, which then led to World of T-Shirts responding, this time actually insulting him, which would lead to World of T-Shirts responding, this time challenging him to a boxing match. This boxing match didn't happen. For a while in New York, there was this chance that Daniel and Josh would meet up face to face in some sort of encounter, but that didn't happen either. They made their peace and ate some lunch together. That was the most peaceful part of the New York trip, because as he was there, he would get into a fight with a bodega employee. The fight was started by Daniel, though in classic Daniel fashion, he had been tricked into fighting the employee, and he would also end up going to the hospital, though he had no major injuries.
I don't know any of these people, and they're impersonating my security. They've been following me around this entire life.
So, this is what I look like after I got assaulted by two fans in New York City in 2023.
Other than this World of T-Shirts thing and some mild trolling, New York did not live up to its hype, and Daniel would leave not long after. Upon arriving back in Denver, he would get into an altercation at a Haagen-Dazs, and he would also create a cameo following in the footsteps of World of T-Shirts.
You want a shirt? Tell them to bring it!
Okay, I'm on the phone with
Get
the
out,
fucking
now!
police. You have a warrant for your fucking arrest.
Oh!
This brings us to the present, where we're just waiting to see what comes next. I'm sure I've mentioned it at the beginning of this video, but if you skip that, this was a really condensed look at Daniel. I'm not going in depth on all the lore. If you're interested in this and want more information, I suggest the subreddit, the wiki, and these two YouTube videos, as they all provide way more information if you're interested. The wiki, for example, provides day-to-day information on what Daniel was up to, from who tricked him into thinking what and what restaurant he ate at. Oh, and if you've made it this far and are curious, there will be a part 2 to World of T-Shirts. Right now I'm waiting on his Iceland trip and a possible France trip. But that's it. Thanks for watching.
The moonlight in your eyes tells me it'll be okay. When you're beside me, the world fades away. Why couldn't it always be this?